So, yeah, thanks for dropping in. And I think what we're going to explore today, I hope will be super helpful for everyone because what we're really going to look at is a deeper dive into meditation and really the purpose of meditation. So, let's maybe start there. What exactly, in your experience, in your insight, in your training in this for many, many years now, what exactly is the real purpose of meditation? And maybe from there, what exactly do we mean by meditation?
I mean, one of the interesting things is that there has been, we can say, a huge sea change in modern society's relationship to meditation. When I first began to teach meditation, which is now quite a while ago, so this is like mid-'80s, early 90s, I used to travel a lot around the United Kingdom teaching. And when I would be on the road, every now and then somebody would ask me, "So what do you do?" kind of thing. And I would say, "I teach meditation." And the conversation would stop right there. They would kind of go back to their newspaper because that was in the day and age of newspapers. These days, if I say I teach meditation, people go, "I need that." So there's a kind of broad understanding that meditation is good for you. And almost to the point I don't know, certainly in certain areas, where it used to be weird if you meditated. And now it's almost like weird if you don't, at least in some circles. And as you sort of point out, well, the way I sometimes phrase it is that when something becomes very popular, or we might even say mainstream, it's almost inevitable that there's a watering down that takes place in terms of the understanding, I would say, of the real purpose of meditation. And the way meditation seems to be being pitched these days through the various apps and social media and so forth, is really as something that, and even now, you get doctors promoting meditation. It's something it's good for your health, lowers your blood pressure. It's something that people use to center themselves, become a little bit more relaxed, de-stress, balance themselves. All of which, by the way, is fantastic and also true. But I think if we investigate when Buddha, who of course is the source of all the practices and meditations that we engage in, when Buddha first introduced the practice of meditation, it wasn't to help people relax or de-stress or become a bit more effective at work or, improve their tennis serve. All of these things that are these days, used to help promote Buddhism in terms of like, you can relax, you can become more effective, more focused. All of that is true, but I see them essentially as kind of beneficial side effects because the meditation is in a sense being a bit undersold because it's kind of being taught as a coping mechanism to help you have a better life, which is a good thing. But when Buddha taught it, he taught it, I would say, as the best, most effective method through which to fulfill everybody's deepest wish, which is happiness. And not just a little bit of happiness, not just a little more happiness, but actually what we're all longing for, which is an ongoing experience of happiness, lasting happiness. And so when Buddha taught meditation, it was to help free people from suffering and help them actually find what everybody's looking for, which is lasting happiness. And so that's really the overall purpose of meditation. And it turns out that will involve an investigation of our own nature. We might say an investigation of reality. And so, as I see it, meditation is really the supreme method, in truth, for investigating reality, which is a bit shocking when you first hear it because we think of, you need electron microscopes and, satellites and, extraordinarily sophisticated instruments with which to investigate reality. But at least within the Buddhist framework, we need meditation in order to investigate reality.
And I think it's great the way you're framing that, because it is true nowadays that most people, as we know, is like they're coming to meditation for those beneficial side effects and thinking that's where it ends. Well, that's wonderful, but that's not it. So looking at it from that perspective, somebody sitting on the podcast today listening to you and thinking, maybe they're thinking, well, that's now interesting, let's explore that. But that seems quite deep, quite profound. But actually the entry point into that is pretty direct and in some ways pretty simple. I'm not saying always easy. Certainly for me at the beginning, it was anything but easy. But it is pretty simple. It is pretty direct. But then as we access that kind of deeper experience over time, it starts to reveal these insights. So for somebody who's brand new listening to this, what is the first step on that journey to investigating the nature of reality, getting to know in your heart the truth of things?
Excellent. Excellent question. And I think, Geshe Kelsang, in his book, How to Transform Your Life, at the back of that book, there is a section called What is Meditation, in the appendix, I believe. And within that, he describes and in a sense guides, as you're reading, if you can follow it and do your best to then put it into practice if you wish. But what we might call a simple breathing meditation. Simple in terms of the description. Of course, the execution involves some practice, but also it's not simple in terms of the reverberation, in terms of like the wisdom, as you mentioned, that it's alluding to. And essentially just to kind of go through the main steps, which is that when you're meditating on the breath, your object, so to speak, is to allow yourself to focus on the experience of the breath, of the air entering and exiting your nostrils. Very simple. Of course, you're up against the fact that we're all very distracted, and so your mind is constantly seeking all sorts of other objects. You're thinking about what you have to do later on. You're fantasizing about some object of attachment. You're worrying about something that somebody said to you, and your mind is kind of moving around a lot. And the moment you notice that, you have to bring your mind back in a very relaxed way. You can't grasp, you can't push for a specific result. Don't allow yourself to get frustrated. Of course, you're going to be distracted, but you keep bringing your mind back to the object. And the key thing here is to just recognize that you want to give yourself permission, essentially, to stop thinking and to just experience the breath. These things are unusual for us because we think about everything. So this can take a little while to get the knack of just allowing yourself to abide with the breath. But over time, you'll be able to do that, to kind of hang out with the peace of the breath and in a sense enjoy it, just the peace of the breath. And what happens then is something, I think, very special. So to quote Geshe Kelsang, he says, when the turbulence of distracting thoughts subsides and our mind becomes still, a deep happiness and contentment naturally arises from within. I'll just say that again. When the turbulence of distracting thoughts subsides and our mind becomes still, a deep happiness and contentment naturally arises from within. I think it's just a lovely, lovely sentence on so many levels. But to me, the key word there is naturally. Naturally. Happiness, and to begin with, it won't be a deep happiness. It'll be a little bit of happiness, a little bit of peace, a little bit of stillness that will eventually you'll begin to understand, hey, wait, there's happiness here in this peace. And eventually it will become a deep happiness as you can hang out there more. But the key point here is that the happiness and the peace is arising naturally. Meaning that when the mind becomes still, it becomes peaceful, and there is a natural happiness there. So that is the wisdom that we want to gain insight into, understand, because that, I think, if you investigate it, is literally revolutionary. in terms of how we normally live our life, within the ordinary paradigm within which we live, and we can kind of take a look at that later, why that comes about, but we're seeking happiness outside of ourselves all the time through certain stimulation, through taste, through touch, through smells, sounds, and so forth, music, whatever, stimulation, activity. And here, this is almost the opposite. We just go in, we allow the mind to become still, and lo and behold, there's a natural experience of happiness. Natural. For free, by the way. And it's always been there. It is actually your nature. And so just allowing yourself to recognize that, to allow yourself to recognize, oh, I have within me my own natural source of peace and happiness, is huge. Because the thing about experiencing a little bit of peace is, as you mentioned, it's not stable. It'll eventually you rise from the meditation, it'll quickly disappear. But the wisdom is in a sense that which will bring you back, because you're going to want to explore that nature. And yeah, that's really the beginning of a sort of inner journey in towards deepening and expanding that experience.
I think it's great the way you're explaining that, because I think when people are listening to this and they're thinking, I don't know what he's talking about, focus on the breath and I'll access peace. But what you're explaining very much and very clearly is this is an experiential journey. You don't need to believe me. You're simply pointing out the truth, and based on your own experience of working with those meditations, and every other meditator has worked with them for over 2,600 years. And what you're revealing there is a beautiful insight that actually by just simply sitting, giving yourself the time and space to go there, be patient with yourself, patient with with that process, you can tap into that natural source of peace and happiness. And actually, as we both know, it actually goes further than that. We start to discover a potential within us, and maybe you could kind of, taking it from where you are there, just kind of go a little bit deeper with that, what it's revealing more about the truth of our own nature and our own potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to use a prop to illustrate.
With all these wires around, he's going to use a prop, because I know what you're going to do with that prop. I've never actually made that one work, so good on you.
Okay, here we go.
I always get it everywhere.
But if I shake the water starts shaking. And at the moment, within our normal way of living, our ordinary way of relating to peace and happiness, basically, we are someone who identifies ourself as being shaky water. The water is swirling, the water is shaking. And we're all frustrated with that, because our mind basically is unpeaceful all the time. And oddly enough, what's actually creating that lack of peace, and there are many levels to that answer, but at an initial level, is that we are precisely seeking happiness in the wrong place. We're looking for it outside of ourselves through stimulation. And, as Geshe Kelsang says, in How to Transform Your Life, the real source of happiness is inner peace. The real source of happiness is inner peace. And yet we keep seeking happiness. And indeed, we're seeking long-term happiness through short-term happiness hits. Let me have some food. Let me enjoy a croissant. Let me drink something. Let me go for a walk. But none of those are lasting. Of course, they can't last. And there's a frustration then, because we're always seeking and not finding what we truly want. So the water is shaking basically all the time. And we just keep trying, maybe I should shake it the other way. Maybe I should move it to the left. But we're constantly shaking. We don't realize we're the ones shaking the water. We're just frustrated that the water is shaking. And sometimes what we do is we start shouting essentially at ourselves, and we become very unhappy with ourselves. And, how many people these days are unhappy with themselves, trapped in a very limited view of who they are. They feel that happiness is not possible for them. Peace is not possible for them. They feel trapped in anxiety. They feel trapped in depression. They feel trapped in hurt. And of course, there'll be all sorts of reasons for why this has come about, various conditions that so to speak, have produced those painful experiences. And, Buddha comes in with a whole, we might say, deeper view of where all that comes from. But just in terms of here, what we're talking about here, our problem is that we've become so familiar with the swirling water of our mind that we've simply become to identify, that's who I am. I am an anxious person. I am a hurt person. I'm an overwhelmed person. I'm an insecure person. And people feel trapped and they want to change and they can't change. And then sometimes what happens is people engage in very unhealthy habits in order essentially to get away from themselves. I would say by and large, that's what most of us are doing all the time. The phone is sort of the ultimate manifestation of that, we carry with us an instrument of distraction. And whenever there's a moment in our life, we seek it out. Instead of spending time with our nature, we run away from our nature because we don't know our nature. And so we're struggling to, in a sense, pacify the water through means of shaking it just some more. So what is the answer? The answer is just to put the water down. I think I probably went off camera on that, but I think you understand that, of course, the water will just settle down naturally. You don't have to do much. And it's allowing that process to take place in your own mind. That's what so much of meditation is about, that you relax, you let the mind settle, and you discover, oh, I have my own natural source of peace and happiness. And as you become more familiar with that, and the actual meaning of the word that we translate as meditation in Tibetan, gom, the meaning of that word, literal meaning, is to familiarize. So as you become more familiar through the process of meditating on that experience, what happens over time is a shift in how you identify yourself. And this will be enormously profound, because you're going to start now identifying yourself on the basis of something that is authentic and true, your actual nature. And you're going to start thinking, oh, I can change. I can change. I can become more peaceful. I can become more kind. I can become more loving. I mean, eventually, we're going to discover that nature is vast. I mean, we call it Buddha nature. And of course, to begin with, that might be a bit much, but you can start off with, oh, I can be a little bit more peaceful nature. I can become a little bit more happy nature. In other words, I can change. And I think that's already, again, revolutionary in terms of how so many people feel these days.
I think, thanks so much for that. And I think it's really practical for somebody who's listening to the podcast today. They're thinking to themselves, when I ever try to sit and meditate, my experience is I sit down and that glass is just shaking all the time. And so what happens is, as a result of that, we tend to overly identify with that heavily distracted, agitated, anxious, hurt mind, whichever way, whichever way we're experiencing that. And I think sometimes what's going on is we're putting far too much weight on this sense of I that we feel we are. It's almost like we feel we're fully identified with all those thoughts and feelings, and there's nothing that can possibly change this. As we know, there are far deeper meditations as we explore the ultimate nature of self and so forth. We can maybe talk about a little bit today, but a very direct route into beginning to realize you're nowhere near as fixed and stuck as you are is literally giving yourself some space and time. Be patient with yourself in the process to stop simply shaking the glass. Just get used to what it's like to just sit, give yourself some quality space and time to just engage with that simple breathing meditation and allow the sense of self that's emerging from that experience of a deeper peace within your heart, a natural feeling of joy, and start to really begin to see, as you say, what is it that's coming out of that experience. It's like now I'm beginning to see myself in a different way through this increasing familiarity. Like, we've talked about this many times, like my way of seeing it, and certainly from my own experiences, wherever you consistently lean, you eventually naturally land. Meaning if I step up here and I lean towards you, I'm going to land on you because that's just what happens if I keep leaning that direction. If I keep leaning in to all those turbulent thoughts, feelings, emotions, if I keep shaking the glass, I'm going to land quite naturally in a place where I feel I'm stuck. I can't change. So what's the point in sitting to meditate? So for people on the podcast who are feeling that way, we have to all understand that actually you don't need to believe just because Kadam Morten's saying it. What you can do is just sit down, give it a try. Keep leaning into that experience of peace. Keep leaning into that understanding and that insight that's emerging from this, of the peaceful, naturally joyful nature that lies within all of us. And then notice the new sense of self that's beginning to gently emerge from that. It's not going to be perfect, certainly in my experience, never perfect. But the more you lean into it, the more you begin to naturally land in that place, like you're saying, where you start to understand your nature a little bit more deeply. Now you begin to understand what's true about yourself. But also, as you say, and you intimate there, there's this huge opening within your heart. I'm now beginning to understand, actually, maybe I have this extraordinary potential. And I'd love you to just kind of, from your own insight and your own experience of as you're working with many people in this field for many, many years, trying to encourage people to meditate and get really in touch with that Buddha nature that you talk about, this pure potential within everyone to accomplish these deep qualities within our heart. I won't go into it too much, but I'll leave it over to you. That person is experiencing this in meditation, and it's opening the door to understanding that Buddha nature. So maybe we could talk a little bit around that, because that really is beginning to give us a deep insight into the true nature of ourselves.
I think one thing that's important is for people, everybody, to understand that they do have a peaceful, pure nature. And that there's a sense in which we're aware of that, or we can recognize aspects of that even before we meditate. Just that feeling, in a sense, of when you come home from work and you give yourself a little bit of space to take 5 or take 2 or take 1, where you just like sit down, and there's that moment where you kind of go, ah. And in that moment, there's a little bit of letting go. And in that moment, there's a little bit of accessing a moment of peace. And in that moment, you just let go temporarily into your nature. You allowed yourself a brief break from, oh no, I've got to do this and I have to do that. Just one moment of connecting to a peaceful, pure heart. Or, you pick up your children or a niece or a nephew, and you have that moment of just love, or a puppy, like you have that moment of love. There's so many examples where for a moment we let go of the sort of continuum of the shaking mind that's caught up in anxiety or hurt or whatever the case may be, or just general busyness. And it's very instructive, because we need what we hopefully can begin to do, as you put it, is lean into that and go, wait a moment. That's not just a sort of brief break in what is my nature, which is I'm a hurt person or I'm an insecure person. No, that little break is indicative of the underlying purity within you. Geshe Kelsang gives us the example of a golden nugget covered in dirt. He says at the moment when we look at our mind, we see dirt. We see a dirty mind. Not necessarily dirty in that way, although that's also perhaps true. But the dirt of anxiety, the dirt of hurt, insecurity, and just being kind of overwhelmed by stuff. And you might see like a little glimmer of gold, but you might think, well, that's just superficial. It's like fool's gold, as opposed to, no, the gold is indicative that if you start wiping away the dirt, you're going to come up against pure gold. And in the same way, it's just allowing yourself to go, that's who I really am. That little bit of love, that's who I really am. That little bit of kindness, that's who I really am. That little bit of peace, that's my nature. That is, when Geshe describes it, he calls it the pure essential nature of every living being. And he says within it is our potential. Eventually, and this might take a while to fully give yourself over to, but certainly for more peace, more love, more compassion, more wisdom, but eventually limitless love, limitless peace, limitless compassion. And the key thing here is to give yourself permission to allow yourself to relax into that when you are meditating, or when you're sitting in the park, or when you're, out running or strolling, or whatever it is that you might do, where you can just for a moment, put down the phone and give yourself a little bit of space to experience some peace, some love, some kindness, and recognize this is my nature. obviously within meditation, and to begin with, it is most likely helpful to have some guided meditation, so that you can begin to find your own footing there before you can become confident to sort of, so to speak, set sail on your own and gain confidence there. But because what we want to learn to do is to trust our own nature, is to trust that it's okay for me to let go of the hurt. Because that can be frightening to people, because they've kind of rationalized their existence around it, or their insecurity or their anger. And to give yourself over to the peace so that you can begin to immerse yourself in it. I don't know, like someone who's a little afraid of immersing yourself in the bath or something like that. Like you want to immerse yourself in it and experience the peace gradually, becoming more and more expansive, pervading your being. Because that is where meditation takes us. Meditation will slowly, over time, take us into quite a transcendental experience, meaning you're transcending your previous perception of who you thought you were. You thought you were this type of person with, some bits of love and some kindness and compassion, but also anger and jealousy and this and that. And now you're discovering, wait, all of that stuff, the anger, the hurt, and so forth, is very superficial. And there's this vast depth of purity and peace, and within it, love, kindness, compassion, wisdom. And that becomes tremendously exciting in its own way. I mean, not in a sort of hyper way, but in a way of you're sort of realizing I'm opening something up, a sense of possibility, a sense of purpose. My life has purpose here within this, because it's not just about getting through the day. It's not just about, feeding myself and the family or whatever the case may be. There's something to be accomplished here that is pointing to, and eventually can be, you can attain what I really want and what I really want for others, which is lasting happiness, lasting freedom from suffering. And it's a portal that you're opening up within your own heart.
It's such a lovely way to reflect for those who are listening into the podcast today and are thinking, half an hour ago when we were talking about this, I'm thinking meditation is this sitting down, focusing on the breath. And now what you're opening up there, and I think it's really beautiful, is actually, you start where you're at. But be sure that as you progress in your meditation practice, you can definitely develop a far deeper insight into who you truly are. And every day you can emerge from your meditation practice really feeling in your heart, you're really connecting with that pure potential within your heart, and that you're beginning to live from that peaceful mind and good heart more and more every day as your growing familiarity starts to increase. And then you're using every event of your day. A little bit of love arises in your heart. You're reminding yourself, this is the truth of who I am. So it's like almost our insights into the nature of who we truly are opens up a whole new world of how we see everyone else. I mean, what has been your experience of that over the years, and obviously teaching many people in many different settings and watching people emerge from that experience with this new sense of a deep insight into the nature of self and others?
It's interesting because, we began by looking at the sort of common conception of meditation and how people are using it, we might say, to improve their ordinary take on life, our present sort of paradigm, which these days is quite grounded in or based on, we might say, a scientific materialism and a kind of one life paradigm, just trying to kind of maximize enjoyment in this one life before it all just disappears. But where your own experience of that is arising out of your meditation will take you is into this deeper understanding of your mind, and how your mind is essentially the basis of your reality. Your mind is creating your experience. And so if you're caught up in hurt and insecurity, if you're caught up in anger, uncontrolled desire, and so forth, you create a disturbed reality that is constantly reflecting itself back at you, then disturbing you even more. So you get even more caught up in what we call the delusions, these disturbed, unpeaceful states of mind. Whereas we can see that when you are focusing on the wisdom aspect of what the meditation is giving you, it's producing, we might say, a paradigm shift where instead of relating to yourself as someone inside a kind of crazy world, trying to do your best to stay safe and somewhat sane, hopefully a little bit of peace and happiness along the way, and to maybe help a few people. This is taking us into something, profoundly more expansive, because we're beginning to recognize I have, over time, well, certainly I have the ability to change. I have the ability to grow, and I'm beginning to sense that, happiness and a lasting experience of happiness is actually possible. And the deeper you go into that, the more that sense will grow. And this is just, one thing I love to point out to people, with which to encourage people with, as well as myself, which is just make sure you're enjoying it, because we have to remind ourselves sometimes that when you're in that meditative space, this is wonderful. Because unfortunately, part of our ordinary paradigm is we're in this achiever mode all the time. And so we're constantly trying to achieve as opposed to enjoy. And so we end up grasping at results and trying to push ourselves towards something as opposed to just simply trusting the process, believing in the process as it's being presented to us. Beginning to trust that if I just hang out here, my understanding and so forth will grow. And the point really is that inner peace is happiness. And the deeper in you go into the nature of that mind, the better it gets, actually. To a sense, what I sort of mentioned before, it'll take you to an experience that is beyond what you could previously have imagined was possible for you. Within the yogic tradition, the tantric tradition of Buddhism, when they talk about the different levels of mind that a practitioner, a yogi or yogini will experience as they get better and better at the meditation, they talk about peace, they talk about happiness, then they start talking about different levels of happiness, they start talking about joy, and they end up at bliss. Meaning bliss, the deeper in you go, the better it gets, and it turns out that bliss is our nature. And that view of ourself, and as you just pointed out, therefore everybody else, your mother, your father, your kids, your siblings, your partner, your family, their families, their friends, so forth, all beings. Everybody has this potential for freedom, and not just a sort of, spaced out peace, but no, bliss, like pure enjoyment as their nature. And in other words, the paradigm that we're being presented with is so optimistic. Yeah, we investigate suffering. We talk a lot about suffering within Buddhism, but only to help us wake up to the fact that our current paradigm, our ordinary framework within which you're living, isn't working. So rather than keep trying to find happiness in a place where you can't find it, let's begin to investigate this other way. And of course, that's going to actually help you in your life because you're going to start bringing peace and happiness and a sense of relaxation and confidence to your life. But what it's going to allow us is to give our very sense of life an incredible purpose and meaning. And, there's a lot of talk these days about, in particular, young people who are really struggling with a sense of profound meaninglessness. I think the whole world is struggling with a sense of profound meaninglessness, producing enormous anxiety and depression and anger, conflict, and so forth. So I just think it would be so wonderful if more people could begin to gain a little bit of an inkling into this, even if it's just beginning to see that gold in the dirt, the golden nugget that's there. So my sense is, is to really understand that at some level, the best way to really be effective in helping others in the world is to begin to give yourself the space and the time to allow yourself to start gaining experience of the various meditations. Because when people see you change, as opposed to you telling them that you've changed, and there can often be a big difference, I'm afraid, that becomes inspirational. That becomes inspirational to them. Yeah. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No,
I
you
think I
did
went over the
perfect. No, you
various
didn't.
tangents.
No,
But
that's perfect. To what we're trying to get to here is really is encouraging people that when you're engaged in these practices, there's so much more depth to what you're doing if we approach it in this way, and as you're explaining very beautifully, because I've often thought of this when I speak to friends and family who are incredibly compassionate people, like really kind and compassionate, and they give a lot of their time and energy to others. But there's like this compassion fatigue that kicks in after a while, where they're constantly giving a lot of time and energy to others, but they're not seeing any outcome from that time and energy they're giving. So they're eventually just getting very frustrated, feeling overwhelmed, and just discouraged that this is really not helping anybody. So it's almost like as a result of that, you turn away and you just think, I can't be there anymore. It's just too tough for me. Your direct experience is opening up this insight in your heart. But it's also your direct experience, I think, in the way you were explaining it there, and I know you very much are quite passionate about this. When you learn to enjoy the pure nature of your mind, when you give yourself time and space to really absorb into that experience, you're not only enjoying that, discovering the truth of your own potential, you're actually, in that essence, you're training in this deeper level of concentration that then enables you to engage in all the meditation practice, what we call the stages of the path, that help you develop those potentials within your heart. So I'd love you to explain a little bit like that, about that, because I know you and I have talked about this many times, and I just love how practical that is, and for people on the podcast, how really accessible it is, even if you're just starting with even a breathing meditation.
I think... I'd love to do that, and I think just to sort of follow on from what you mentioned about what we call the Lamrim, the stages of the path, meditations that we are encouraged to practice in a cycle of meditations. Sometimes it's presented as 14 meditations or 15 meditations, or in one book 21 meditations, but it's basically a series of meditative insights and special wishes, aspirations, determinations that we generate that are all designed to help us nurture that potential that we are discovering within ourselves. Because we will need encouragement. And essentially, you were just pointing that out, because some days we're going to find ourselves in a hailstorm of difficulties and situations. And the danger is that we get so swept up in that we lose sight of the natural peaceful purity in our heart, in our potential. So that's why you want to develop that familiarity with that space in the heart where you really trust, you know it's there. You know it's there, even if you're having a day where you feel very caught up in unhappiness or anger, anxiety. That's going to be part of our life, all of that. At some point, we're going to experience deep grief. We're going to experience very strong challenges at various points. And there's an image within Buddhism for the practice of what we call going for refuge, which is it's an umbrella. It seems like a very British image. And I was just thinking the other day how, when it starts raining, really that's a signal to put up the umbrella. So you can go, oh no, it's raining. But really it's just like, oh, time to put up the umbrella. And in the same way, if you begin to develop this kind of relationship to that peaceful heart, trusting it, knowing it to be your nature, and knowing it also to be, we might say, the experience of what we call Dharma, the essence of Buddha's teachings, and an experience of inner peace and wisdom, love, compassion, all of that is kind of built into that. When you begin to understand that, then when you find yourself caught up in difficulties, put up the umbrella. And, you might still get wet for a while, but over time, it's just that knowledge that if I don't allow myself to get caught up in judging others, judging myself, all that kind of stuff, but instead just, okay, right now is the time, as you said, to take a little moment for yourself and let your mind settle. I will find my way into that refuge in my heart where I can access my own pure nature, my potential. I can begin to then connect to that wisdom that we learned through the stages of the path, how to fully rejoice and recognize the incredible opportunity we have so that we become motivated to really want to actually nurture this. So you go for refuge there and you want to nurture that potential within yourself. Now, one thing that becomes super clear is that the more that you develop that skill to be able to kind of give yourself over to an object of meditation, and it can be the breath, it can be the experience of peace, it can be the nature of the mind, and what we've been discussing kind of eventually naturally lends itself into a very special meditation on the nature of the mind, which is seen as like almost like the best meditation for developing concentration. But yeah, it's the ability to deeply enjoy your object, any Lamrim object, to give yourself over to it in a sense, as opposed to grasping at it and holding back, because then you're always keeping yourself separate from your meditation. Like with dancing, if you really want to have a good dance, you got to give yourself over to the dance. If you really want to have a good meditation, you have to give yourself over to the meditation and allow the meditation to pervade you. And that will just naturally, because it produces such a special experience internally, it will naturally help you to develop concentration. And that, of course, will empower all our other meditations. And, personally, I always recommend people start before you do a Lamrim meditation, before you do your tantric practice or whatever you might be doing. First, just spend some time making sure you get into the right frame of mind and you set up, we might say, the right paradigm. Like you're connecting to your potential. You're not caught up in your worry, your anxiety. You're identified with your potential. Through that, you're actually connecting at some level, we can say, to enlightenment, to blessings, to kind of a special energy. And you're full of motivation, therefore, to nurture that potential through applying the meditation. But your mind will be focused, as opposed to feeling like you're on the outside of your practice, trying to catch up all the time. You're going to be in it.
Anyone who's listening, who's thinking that in some way this is hard work, it's the opposite. If it's hard work, you probably need to think a little bit more deeply about what you're doing in meditation. And as you say, one of the most energizing aspects of this is taking the time and space to get that set up right at the beginning, connecting with your pure potential. And for those who understand it more and more over time, connecting with that enlightened energy that really empowers the mind, uplifts the mind, and allow that compassion to emerge from that. It's possible. I feel it's possible for me because I'm in this space where it's feeling like it's possible, and it's possible for everyone else. That is such a powerful mind to want to go further and deeper into that. But what I'd love to explore is, as we go through that journey, especially those stages of the path meditation that we call Lamrim meditations, eventually through our meditation practice, if we go back to the beginning, we start to gain insight into the nature of reality, the nature of everything. And so our meditation practice, as we were explaining at the beginning, when we understand its purpose, is to really get to this deep knowing in your heart, what's true about yourself, others, this world and life. What is it that we're beginning to gain insight and how through meditation practice into the nature of reality, into the nature of this life?
Okay.
In 2 minutes? No, I'm joking. I know you could do it in 2 minutes. But you've got all the time in the world, Ish.
Well, we began again by talking about how we end up in our just normal, ordinary life, we end up becoming too familiar and therefore way too identified with our unhappy minds, our disturbed minds. And so that becomes at some level the basis of our identity. And built into that is a kind of limitation, because essentially the self that we normally see, to use Geshe Kelsang's, I think, ingenious phrase, the self that we normally see, we believe that is my actual self. It's an interesting way he phrases it, the self that we normally see. It's the one that we're seeing, perceiving, relating to, and we just simply believe it is who we are. And there's a lot of aspects to this, but due to that, we call that ignorance. That's the underlying root delusion from which all the other disturbed, unhappy, unpeaceful states of mind, the delusions, anger, jealousy, greed, attachment, they all arise from this root of grasping at things, not just the self, but other people, the world, anything we perceive, really. We perceive it as if it were completely independent of the mind, an objectively existing entity. And so we grasp at ourselves as an objectively existing, messed up person, angry person, hurt person, insecure person, objectively existing. So therefore, that's how we perceive reality. This is not just intellectual. This is perceptual. It's very deeply ingrained in us. And within Buddhist practice, that's what we're taking on. We're not just trying to shift a few intellectual misconceptions. We're actually trying to, we are engaged in the methodology which will eventually lead to effectively changing that underlying misapprehension of reality. So it means you and I are always caught, I don't know where you're at, but generally speaking, within our world, we're caught up in a very dualistic framework, a sense of I am over here, you are over there, other people are over there. There's a sense of separation, and we've become completely immersed in ourself, in a self-centered take on reality. And that self-centered take on reality, we call that self-cherishing. We're cherishing the wrong self, the self that we normally see, the limited one, the deluded one. So that self-centered take on reality, we feel we need to defend that hurt self, insecure, and we defend it with anger and with jealousy, and of course it doesn't work. It just makes everything worse, and we're caught in a cycle of pain. We're constantly seeking happiness, and we keep revolving back into suffering. In Buddhism, we say for lifetimes we've been doing this. And that's why this opportunity is so tremendous. This sort of revolutionary take is significant. It's something you really want when you start getting a sense of that underlying goal you want to take advantage of. And the Lamrim helps us to do that. But essentially, what even the basic meditation is helping us to get a feeling for, the basic meditation of just allowing your mind to settle and peace arising naturally, happiness arising naturally. It's helping you to recognize, wait, this version of myself that I think is the real me actually isn't. And eventually when we get down the Lamrim, further down the Lamrim, we're going to take on that misconception directly and investigate this self and discover actually that limited self is our own idea. It's our own, Geshe Kelsang would call it hallucination. Doesn't represent our reality at all. Whereas when you start identifying with your potential, your Buddha nature, that is reflecting your reality. And of course, that's true of your perceptions of others then as well. You have a limited take on so-and-so in your family. You think, well, they're a such and such, a limited person, and they deserve my judgment or my anger, or this person's somebody who really is a source of happiness, and you start grasping at them and making completely unfulfillable demands upon them and so forth. So you start recognizing, wait, they're not how I perceive them to be. They are all people who have this incredible potential. They can change. And they're trapped in that painful self-limiting conception. That's where their hurt and their insecurity and sometimes their bad behavior and so forth comes from. And so therefore, even negativity around us is seen within this underlying optimistic paradigm, so that, as you were just suggesting, compassion arises naturally. Even when you see people doing hurtful things or negative things, because it's not coming from their nature, it's coming from their misapprehension, it's coming from what we call their delusion. And so getting deluded with them, how's that going to help, So it turns out that wisdom really is the answer. It will lead to love, to compassion. And that, of course, imbues us with an incredible sense of purpose. Because our life becomes much more, way more than just about ourselves. In fact, because the self that we normally see, which is the one we're so concerned about, you begin to recognize I can let go of it. You just see yourself in connection with everybody. And, Geshe Kelsang has that wonderful analogy of we're one cell within the body of all living beings. And everything we have depends upon the activities of all the other cells. Our clothing, our food, our education, our name. But to me, almost like, something that sometimes we forget, everything I do affects all the other cells, affects the whole body of all living beings. And so you're imbued with an incredible sense of purpose. I want to be a healthy cell. I want to be a cell that is flowing the good stuff, health, nutrients in the sense of wisdom nutrients, kindness nutrients, compassion nutrients, love nutrients into the body of all living beings, And that to us is what Buddha represents, someone who attained that state. Again, not just to help people de-stress a little bit, but to help people wake up to their potential. Because how wonderful that would be. And, that is essentially our purpose, to facilitate the flourishing of modern Buddhism so that it can be rendered accessible, so that it can be, Geshe Kelsang has rendered it accessible. Our job is to try to help get that out to people. Because I think it's just be very helpful.
Great, thank you so much. And I think for anyone listening in today, there's just so much in there. You and I could definitely go on for another few hours. But I think there's so much in there that really, I think what's wonderful about today is it's so deeply practical. And I think often at the moment people are exploring what is the reality of this life, what is the nature of reality. And I think often people come across many different views and opinions. But I think what I'm hearing from you, and I think what's most important, is what's primary in that process of understanding the nature of reality, which is our own happiness, our own peace, and how we can bring that peace and happiness to bear on our life, but to bring that peace and happiness into the lives of others and try our best to help them too. Because really, and I know you and I have discussed this, that really is the most important thing. We can talk about the various different perspectives everyone has on reality, but at the end of the day, that's all fine. And yes, people can explore that. But I guess what we're trying to express here today is that understanding, if I'm right, that really what we need to get to over time is that my own peace and happiness, and bringing peace and happiness to a struggling world. Is that your kind of...
Absolutely.
I know that's your kind of take on that, but maybe you want to expand on that a bit.
Absolutely. I think it's such an important point, because sometimes I'll go out into YouTube land and just look at what people are discussing and thinking about. And there are all these fascinating investigations of reality. Science is constantly changing. Right now it's going through a big upheaval around the Big Bang and, so forth, meaning they're constantly having to shift their paradigms. And then there's all these obvious discussions between different takes on, atheists, theists, and so forth, all this stuff going on. Within the Buddhist practice, we're essentially not that interested in what created the world. Buddha was asked these types of questions, and there's a famous point where he maintained a noble silence, and it wasn't because maybe he didn't have an answer. It's just that the answer is not significant from our perspective in terms of what we're trying to solve, which is how do we get rid of suffering? And how do we help people fulfill their deepest wish? Lasting happiness. let's attain lasting happiness, and then let's chat about where the world came from, if you see what I'm saying. So everything within Buddhism is about that. And I think that's so important to recognize, because then we understand that is actually what I'm trying to accomplish. And the investigation of reality that we undertake is completely, in a sense, subordinate to the manifesting of pure happiness that we can then share with others. It turns out that because our suffering is arising from a misapprehension of reality, we have to engage in a very kind of thorough and, I think, tremendously exciting and fascinating and take on deconstructing the mistaken view, the sort of hallucination of a separate self and a separate other that within which we're so struggling these days, that creates loneliness and fragmentation in our society. So, yes, basically, that understanding that is what we're trying to accomplish, and really allowing yourself to begin to accomplish that in your own heart is so significant. And I stress that allowing, because I think there's a sense in which we don't, because we're so busy seeking and so accustomed to not finding that we need to seek some more, that we'll even bring that seeking mentality as if a meditative experience were somehow separate from us. We'll bring that into our own practice, and we'll try to push and shove our way to it, and we'll feel frustrated in our meditation and all that stuff. And then sometimes even reject it and think, well, it doesn't work for me. Well, yeah, it's not working because there's a sense in which we never fully gave it a chance and learned how to relax into our own nature and begin to discover, oh, it was here all along. An analogy of Buddha nature is precisely, it's like buried treasure. It's like buried treasure. And there's a person who felt that they were poor their whole life. And then somebody comes along and says, actually, you're not poor because you got treasure buried beneath your house. And, lo and behold, we're like that. We have this treasure. And everything we're trying to do is just learn to access it ourselves and then hopefully share it with others.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's a perfect place to conclude this conversation. As always, you and I could talk on for the next 3 hours, and I'd absolutely love to, because I think we've only just got started, really. But thankfully, we'll have you on the podcast again many, many times. So I really appreciate that. And I think it's that conclusion at the end of this. I really hope that if people take nothing else away from this, whether they're completely new to meditation, been meditating for years, there's so much more you can discover through your sitting every day, just going into your heart and working in meditation practice. And as you say, at the conclusion of all of that, there is this treasure within all of us. It's sitting there anyway. Through what we've explored today and what we'll explore in more episodes, you can tap into that treasure. And even more importantly, everyone you love and everyone you see that's struggling at the moment, they all have that incredible potential and treasure within them as well. So thank you so much, my dear friend. It's been fantastic to sit down and chat with you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, just a quick one. We'd love to get these podcasts to more and more people over time so that many people can benefit from these conversations. So to help us get there eventually, and also if you think it might be helpful to somebody today, maybe you'd like or share this episode. Also to help us grow this channel over time, please feel free to subscribe.